there is a story you might have heard about a man in a storm. And the weather report on the radio and on the TV said that there could be flooding. There should be flooding, and you should leave. But the man said, I am praying, and I am a devout person, and I'm praying, and God is going to save me. Well, the floodwaters started coming. They're lapping at his door. Some people come along in a boat, and they say, come on, come on. And he says, I am praying, God is going to save me. Well, the floodwaters keep coming. This person climbs up onto the roof. Along comes a helicopter. Jump into the basket. We'll reel you up. God is going to save me. I am praying to God to save me. Of course, doesn't end well for the man. He shows up at the pearly gates and he says to Peter, hey, why didn't you save me? And he says, who do you think sent the weather report and the boat and the helicopter? It's a funny little story. And I think it's a common misunderstanding, at least from my perspective, about prayer, that somehow if I'm good enough and if I pray right, then I will convince some being to fix my life. I call it sort of that Santa Claus God experience where, you write a letter, Santa will bring you what you want. This is week 4 of our trek through Unity's 5 basic principles. So the first one was there's one presence and one power in the universe, God the good. That's it. One, no opposite force of evil, one presence, period. Number 2, all beings have the divine spark. And like I said, spark is an understatement. We are that, all of that. And our lives are here for expressing more and more of it and becoming more and more skillful at expressing our divinity, which is all of us, not a spark. But if you want to know more about that, go back and watch that talk. Number 3 is I create my life experiences through my thoughts and actions and practices. And number 4 is that there's power in affirmative prayer, which increases our awareness of God. Now you probably heard the flood story that I told, but you've probably also heard that saying, if you're feeling separate from God, who moved? Now, since God is everywhere, that's a little theologically shaky, but it reminds us, it's sort of a good reminder that God is everywhere present and our separateness is our own doing. It's a perception of separateness, not an actual separateness. Now, this is not entirely all of our doing. Of course, there's lots of things going on in our world, and many of them benefit from us believing we're separate from spirit and from each other. Because if we really remembered our connection to one another, well, people who profit from conflict wouldn't get very much, would they? So, the sun is burning and emitting light all the time. Here on Earth, of course, we experience it only some of the time. We experience various amounts of light and dark every day. Right now, it's light outside, but I can't see the sun because there's clouds. It doesn't mean that the sun has stopped shining. It just means that we can't see it. And I think that this is like how we sometimes feel like we are alone or without God. It's like we're on the dark side of the planet. But the good news is we only have to remember and bring our thoughts back to the one presence and one power. And we come back into that experience of God. Now, the 5 principles in the 5 principles, the first 3 are not decorations of truth, declarations of truth. Maybe they're decorations too. I don't know. They're declarations of truth. So there's one presence, one power. You're it, you are it, and we create our life experiences. Those are just declarations of truth. The second 2 are the how-to portion. So everything you need to know is right here in these 5 principles, are all the basics. So if we believe there's one power and presence in the universe and that it's everywhere and we're it, how do we get from knowing it to living it? Prayer and meditation. All of our spiritual practices. There are as many ways to pray as there has ever been people. Just imagine all the people that have ever been. That's how many different ways of praying there are. It's the gentle whispers of a grandparent over a newly born babe, the jubilant dancing of Thanksgiving, the daily choice to continue, the cry for help in crisis, the quiet communion of a sunrise. And of course, all those ways we think of as the usual ways too. We can boil today's theme down to this quote by Unity's poet laureate, James Dillard Freeman. Sometimes the answer to prayer is not that it changes life, but that it changes you. Or this quote from Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity. Instead of supplication, prayer should be a jubilant thanksgiving. This method of prayer quickens the mind miraculously and, like a mighty magnet, draws out the spiritual qualities that transform the whole person when they are given expression in mind, body, and affairs. So what they're saying is when we focus our gratitude on what we already have, when we focus our thoughts on knowing the truth of our wholeness, when we affirm a resolution to a solution, we are not asking for a magic wand that will fix this, that will fix it, Santa Claus God to answer our list. No, this type of prayer actually transforms us by aligning us with the truth of our being. So if we were that person in the flood, this kind of prayer would make us see the divine solution in each of those opportunities. When we shift our perspective from being when we shift our perspective to being more and more in the knowing of the truth of who we are, which is divine, then whatever challenges or obstacles we see will also be transformed because we'll be looking through different glasses. There is wisdom, strength, understanding, whatever we need to move forward. So if I were to title today's talk, I would call it Prayer Changes Things. But that's really more of a play on words because I believe that prayer changes us and then we change things. And sometimes that means it changes us and that changes how we interact with the next person and the next person. And it does change things in the big world. It changes our big drop in the collective consciousness. Of course, the most effective and long-lasting way to see this prayer come true is by consistent practice. Prayer and spiritual practice are part of many faith traditions. And, I always really take note when there's these commonalities across traditions, There's really more, I think, than there is different. For these commonalities point to something that's true, deeply true about humanity and who we've come here to be, beyond the trappings of tradition or culture or anything else. All of those things are the decorations and particularities, but the truth of taking care of our neighbor and to commune with the divine and to walk in peace, these are universal. Now, unity is and always has been about practical spiritual practice. When Myrtle and Charles Fillmore began, they were focused on helping folks use positive affirmative prayer to enhance whatever spiritual practice they already were a part of. They actually held their prayer meetings on Sunday evenings so the people could go to whatever their regular church was. These teachings are to enrich our life to the extent that we utilize them. And so I say, hey, let's use them. Did you know that if you gave 1% of your day to spiritual practice, that's only 15 minutes? 15 minutes. There's probably plenty of much less productive ways to use 15 minutes. Anybody else? And I'm not judging. Hey, time of rest that we might sometimes in other ways call unproductive is important too. That's an important thing. But let's make sure we get time in there for spiritual practice. Why? Because it makes a difference. It changes us. It changes our neural pathways. It changes the way we think and respond. It changes me, and I have spent enough time with people who've made lifetime commitments to spiritual practice to see that it does indeed make a difference. I see people who just unflappable, I think, is one of the words I would use for some of those people. Just present. And something else I do beyond meditation time is to have activities that are quiet zones. And I think it's so easy, to have the radio or a podcast or something playing in the background that we're sort of listening to. And, I am a big fan of using music to as a mood influencer. So we pay attention to what kind of music we do listen to. But they're in these quiet places. It allows space for ideas and inspiration to show up. Many of you probably know one of my quiet places is the shower. Because, you're sort of on automatic pilot usually when you're in the shower, right? And so it's a time for just to let things percolate. I often get ideas for what I'm going to talk about or my next TikTok video while I'm in the shower. And I even have a little bath crayon that you get for kids so I can write it down so I don't forget I'm in there. There's another story about a person visiting New York City. And they are lost. And so they say to someone passing by, "How do you get to Carnegie Hall?" And the person replies, "Practice, practice, practice." Which is true, but not the answer the person was looking for. So how do we practice? Well, there's as many ways as there are people. We can echo our Muslim friends and pause 5 times a day to reaffirm our oneness with all that is. We could be inspired by our Jewish friends and refrain from work at least part of a day to celebrate the Sabbath. We could learn from our Eastern friends and regard all beings as sacred. We could be humbled by the traditions of the indigenous peoples who honor the earth and nature and the seasons. There's so many ways. So I cannot compel you to enter into a prayer practice by telling you that you're going to hell if you don't, because Unity doesn't roll that way. I don't roll that way. And I can't tell you that you should do it because you'll be socially ostracized by the group if you don't, because we don't roll that way. But I can encourage you to keep up the practice. Practice, practice, practice. Whatever it may be, whatever your practice might be. And I think there's a lot of value in being curious and exploring other options and modalities. You never know what you might discover. As metaphysics teacher Paul Hasselbeck writes, the point of prayer is not so much about the goodies we get, but by the goodness we realize we are. Our prayer and meditation practice is about remembering that we are the one presence and one power. The more we realize our goodness, the more we can be the positive change agent in our world. Now, that's all about what next week is about, so we won't get into that now. But I do just want to point out that just like I like to notice those commonalities in our faith traditions, there's something to notice in the fact that many of the instigators of a more just and equitable society are also deeply spiritual people. Our spiritual practice, our prayer time changes us and allows us to change the world. Our spiritual practice time is really the place where we activate all the tools in our toolbox. It's where we release things. It's where we affirm things. It's where we notice the sticking points that maybe we could find some resolution or change for. It's where we use our power of imagination to envision what's next in the world we want to create. It's where we activate, where we let go of our hesitation. So the prayer practice is not just a little thing we do on the side. It is the thing that we do. It is the tool for activating all of our spiritual practice and all of the knowledge that we have. It's our integration point. Because without integration, it's just brain knowledge, and that's not very useful in the world. So that is the first of the two how-to portions of Unity's basic principle. Prayer changes us, and we change our world.